At the University of Toledo, we are surrounded by experts. And we tap into those experts here on Rocket Talk.
We've been off for the summer, so we're catching up on some of those topics that we missed while we were gone. And this week, we have a big one. On June 24th of this year, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. There's been plenty of commentary on how this has impacted folks personally, but I think plenty of us are still confused about the legal aspects. So this week, we've recruited some experts to help us sort this out. But before we discuss the legal aspects of the abortion debate in our state, my colleague, Jason Hibbs, spoke with a local politician who believes the overturning of Roe changes everything on the campaign trail.
When a local union president decided to run for an Ohio House seat, she thought she had a pretty good grasp on the motivating issues. But when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe, she says everything changed. It's a sunny Saturday in this Lucas County community.
Good morning.
A perfect day for some old-fashioned politicking.
If you vote, I'm knocking your door.
Democratic Ohio House candidate Erica White says she's been outspent by her Republican rival, incumbent Derek Merrin. Merrin's website says he's running on the economy, lowering crime, and supporting schools. Issues White says people are concerned about. But after Roe's reversal,
I don't even have to bring the conversation up.
Voters voiced some new concerns.
All of a sudden, that shifted where women's rights, what is happening to women in this country, and when we're seeing it being shifted to states, it rose to the top.
So she's knocking on every registered voter's door in this area, not passing up the apartments either.
I think it's definitely going to make a big difference in me winning my district because women, no matter how they affiliate as a party, don't want their rights taken away.
But the self-described moderate knows it's a delicate issue. I asked White several times if she supports any restrictions to abortion access.
So would you have any restrictions on abortion?
And just how late is too late for the procedure.
So those are your personal, so as a representative, where do you fall on this? Any restrictions?
So, but we want to make sure that access to women is open, that they have.
So when is that time?
I don't know. There is a complete time.
It was hard to get a direct answer. White admits it's a tough question.
That is a hard question for me, and I'm just going to be honest, because we're saying we trust women, and you're asking me to sign on legislation. I would have a hard time signing anything in which it would restrict women to abortion care.
Back in the subdivision, it's answers like that solidifying one pro-life evangelical mom's decision to vote Republican. She didn't want to go on camera, but her neighbors did.
So I'm an independent.
Patty Rono says the abortion issue alone could cause independents to lean left for the midterms.
I do believe that women should have the right to choose, and it could persuade me.
Kent Boroff just got home, missed the candidate's visit, but thinks she probably has the right message for this election.
I think women should be able to do what they want with their bodies.
Which is why White is framing the midterms as a fight for rights.
This is a time for women who want to fight for women.
White is campaigning on more than just the right to choose, but says that's the new issue people bring up. I reached out to her Republican opponent, Representative Merrin. A spokesperson for him said they forwarded my request to the representative for his review. We have not yet heard back. I also reached out to his campaign via Facebook Messenger. They did not respond. The Lucas County Republican Party also hasn't returned my calls or emails for this story. And we have a link to my entire interview with Erica White on our YouTube page. Just search UToledo Rocket Talk. Ben?
We're speaking with Rebecca Zietlow and Lee Strang, both professors of law and values at the law school here at UToledo. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So we only have about 7 minutes, and this is a topic where we could spend a half hour or so talking about each of these questions that we talked about in advance here. So before we really talk about kind of the Supreme Court's recent decision, can you paint the context for us a little bit? What do we need to know about the context of the original Supreme Court's decision back in the 70s that made abortion legal throughout the U.S.?
Sure. So at the time, abortion was illegal in almost every state. There was the beginning of an abortion rights movement that came out of the feminist movement at the time. And then the court decided the case of Roe versus Wade. So the activists were using both legislative and legal advocacy. And in Roe versus Wade, the court held that a woman's right to choose whether or not to have an abortion is a fundamental right, albeit a right that could be restricted at a certain point in the pregnancy, and rooted that right in a promise of individual autonomy that's in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment.
So if we fast forward to the summer of 2022, the Supreme Court overturns that decision. What changed in the meantime? What's the Supreme Court's rationale for overturning that decision?
Yeah, well, one thing that didn't change was the Constitution, but a lot of other things did change, Ben. So I think there's a lot of causes for the change. So one of them would be politics. After Roe versus Wade, you had parties filtering their membership, and approach to abortion or a right to life or pro-choice became an important component of each of the coalitions, about 25% of voters in each coalition. That had an impact on presidential elections, and so you would see candidates from the different parties articulating their respective views on abortion generally, and Roe in particular. And then that had an important impact on the judicial nominations. And so I thought President Trump, one of the most powerful aspects of his campaign was he said, here's the list of people that I'm going to appoint to the Supreme Court. And it was not a coincidence, I think, that those folks ended up being on the Supreme Court when he was elected, in part because of that promise, and then made a decision to overrule Roe versus Wade. And I think that's also wrapped up as well in the rise of another way of interpreting the Constitution. So there's longstanding debates about how we as Americans interpret the Constitution. And just as a general categorization, one approach is called originalism, where you look to the meaning of the text when it was adopted. And the other approach generally is called living constitutionalism, which has an evolving, changing meaning over time. And originalism, partly as a response to Roe, grew in influence and then basically became the official position of one of the parties, of the nominees, who then used that as a foundation for the Dobbs case and overruling Roe versus Wade.
So that seems like there might be kind of a pragmatic consequence, like you're saying. Like, what were the Supreme Court's stated rationales for overturning it?
Well, basically, the rationale was that Roe was wrong.
Yeah.
and
why? Why did the Supreme Court believe it was wrong?
Because the court said that the Constitution doesn't mention abortion, which it does not. And the court purported to use what Professor Strang calls the originalist method, which was to look back and see whether abortion was legal at the time that the 14th Amendment was enacted. It was not. And the framers of the 14th Amendment were talking about abortion rights per se. And so the court said that's the reason why Roe was wrong. The court was wrong in Roe and overruled the court.
So what does this pragmatically mean for, basically everyone, legal, political perspective, those who are seeking abortions, politicians, just what's the fallout of this decision?
Yeah, I think it opens up something that many of us have been maybe thinking a little bit about for 50 years or as long as we've been lawyers and legal academics, but there are a lot of new issues and unexplored areas. One that just came to mind to me over the past couple of weeks is when in looking towards the Dobbs opinion and it being Roe being overruled, I think a lot of us thought about state legislatures passing legislation to protect abortion, passing legislation to restrict abortion. But one of the things that I thought a little bit about, but I don't think there's been much scholarship and discussion about, has been what about the state judiciaries interpreting their state constitutions? So here in Ohio, for example, we had one mandamus action, which is kind of an unusual procedure action in the Ohio Supreme Court, which ended up not being successful. And then more recently down, I think in Hamilton County, there's been litigation where a state trial court judge has enjoined Ohio's restrictions on abortion because of the 2010 Healthcare Freedom Amendment, which was passed in response to the Affordable Care Act. So there's been just a lot of institutions, a lot of people moving in a lot of different directions.
And so, I mean, what I'm hearing you say is maybe politicians can't sit on the fence anymore. Is that one way to say it?
That's right, and on both sides, right? So I think for a long time, pro-choice politicians sort of just pointed to the Supreme Court and said abortion is legal, and in general, voters weren't so motivated, pro-choice voters weren't so motivated by that decision, whereas pro-life voters, they really were really motivated in overturning this. Now, however, they are faced with the consequences. So you see It's going back to state governments, as Professor Strang said. It's going back to the legislatures, and now they have to answer questions like, at what point do you support a ban? Are there going to be any exceptions, et cetera? And what it means is that rights are going to be different in every state. And what it also means is people are going to be traveling from state to state, sometimes to exercise those rights or what they believe to be their rights. So that opens all sorts of issues of federalism and interstate relations, unless the Congress enacts a law outlawing abortion nationally, which could also happen. Some Republican members of Congress are saying that they want to do that. So it's really up in the air. And I agree, the state constitution aspect of it is a fascinating, I think, that people had not thought about very much, but it's turning out to be an important issue.
Yeah. The only one thing I'd add to Professor Zietlow's point was that I think for Republican politicians, they had a way in which to hide as well. It's not our fault, it's the Supreme Court's fault. And now they have to, as Professor Zietlow was saying, say where they're going to be at in different positions and then defend them to their voters and each other's based on not necessarily what the Constitution says or purportedly says, but what they think are sound policy reasons.
Well, it'll be fascinating to see what happens. So thank you both so much. We appreciate you being here. And that's all the time that we have for today. Thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time on Rocket Talk.